On March 12, 2025, Kilmar Garcia, a Salvadorian immigrant, family man, and father of two, was driving his son to visit his grandmother in Baltimore. But he would never make it, as he met a fate that many in the United States currently face. Stopped by Homeland Security, detained by ICE agents, and deported 3 days later to El Salvador's Socope prison. This was in spite of Garcia having withholding of removal status, granted from a previous detention case in 2019. After an initial lawsuit by Garcia's wife, appeals to both the Fourth Circuit and the Supreme Court, Garcia was returned to the U.S., not to right a wrong, but now for new criminal charges for transporting illegal immigrants in Tennessee since 2016. After he was released from federal custody, he was landed in an immigration detention center in Maryland. As of September 8th, reported by the Independent article, the Trump administration has made renewed attempts to redeport Garcia again, now to the African continent in Esquatili. The debacle of Garcia's deportation, being mired in problems of his legal status, to the initial deportation to El Salvador, return to the U.S. to face criminal charges, claims of association to MS-13, and ongoing threats to be deported to a completely new country, serves to highlight the dysfunction of immigration that the U.S. has struggled with throughout the 21st century. This leaves us with the question: how does the deportation and treatment of Kilmar Garcia by the Trump administration highlight the current dysfunction and politicalization of illegal immigrants in the U.S.? To analyze this question, we'll be using blamocracy theory, a model on analyzing modern political communication, and we'll be exploring how it impacts the rhetoric used on the topic of immigration. First, we'll explore the main components of blamocracy theory with examples relating to the Affordable Care Act. Second, I'll discuss how these components of blamocracy are applied to the deportation of Kilmar Garcia. And last, I'll show the implications that Garcia's deportation will have on how we view the current U.S. immigration policy. So now, let's get started with explaining what blamocracy theory is and its main components. Blamocracy theory was developed by authors Francisco Bibolote, Alberto Benizzi, and Giacomo Maffredini in their research paper, Blamocracy: Casual Attributions in Political Communication, published in June of 2025. The theory describes that the development of modern political communication has become more polarized and simplified on casual attributions that are identified as blame and merit. In their findings, the authors identified three main components that explain the shift in development: blame versus merit attribution, casual responsibility assignment, and the spread of trust and legitimacy. Firstly, let's start out with blame versus merit attributions. The authors in their research found that in political communication, outcomes are either identified as blame or merit, which is then assigned the responsibility to who made said outcomes. An example of how we would think about this is with the Affordable Care Act passed by President Obama. Democratic officials such as Nancy Pelosi, by her own congressional website, would have emphasized merit in the bill for expanding coverage to tens of millions, whilst Republicans such as Senator Mitch McConnell would emphasize blame to the ACA as government overreach. Next, we have casual responsibility assignment. The authors in their research specify that once an outcome is attributed as blame or merit, casual responsibility seeks to identify the main political agent that is responsible for said outcome, whether to be given credit for something good or bad. Thinking back to the Affordable Care Act, an example of casual responsibility would be Scott Brown's victory in the 2010 Massachusetts Senate election. Scott's victory broke the Democratic filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and Vox News in a 2017 article would credit Scott's victory as a near-death experience for the ACA, and Republicans would attribute merit to Brown specifically for serving as a roadblock in the ACA. And lastly, we have our third component of trust and legitimacy. Now, the authors in their research believe that once we identify an outcome as either blame or merit and identify the political agent responsible for it, the next step is measuring the correlation between merit and blame to public attitudes, essentially how casual attributes impact trust in politics and government. A good way to think about this is with the Tea Party movement. A CNN article from 2014, only 5 years after the Tea Party emerged, notes one of the main points of unity came from Obama as government overreach for how he responded to the Great Recession and expanded the government's role in healthcare. Attributing blame towards the Democratic stimulus and healthcare helped to polarize individual views that aligned with the Tea Party and served to increase distrust in Obama, which we saw in effect by the 2010 midterms, which saw Democrats lose control of Congress. And so now that we've identified blamocracy theory and its three main components, let's now get into how we apply this to the topic of Garcia's deportation. The authors of blamocracy theory identify outcomes in political communication that are either framed as merit or blame with the purpose of assigning responsibility for both positive and negative results for the benefit of one side. ABC's report in March of 2025 of the initial deportation of Kilmar to El Salvador and subsequent backtracking of ICE to call his deportation an administration error serves as an example of how responsibility is assigned to Trump in this case. With Trump being the incumbent president and responsible for expanding ICE over his presidency, oppositional forces such as the Democratic Party, immigration activists, and critics have all painted this event as a subsequent failure of the Trump administration. Blame can also focus on the mismanagement of authority and control in both ICE and Homeland Security. Next, we look at the second component. In casual responsibility, we identify the political agent or institution that is responsible for a political outcome and is thus attributed the merit or blame of said outcome. In the case of Kilmar Garcia, attributing blame can be seen in the sense of a revolving door as to what internal part of the Trump administration holds fault for how Garcia has been treated. A multitude of sources keeping up with the ongoing events, ranging from Time Magazine, NBC, to Homeland Security itself, have differing viewpoints. It could be emphasized that the administration error by ICE when they admitted to a faulty incarceration puts them and its head, Christine Nolm, at fault for the outcome. It could be said that the judicial system holds fault for Garcia's deportation, as the legal system was unable to clear up the original accusations of gang affiliation during his initial detention in 2019, and even after being granted withholding of removal status. And finally, on to our third component. Once merit and blame is described, trust and legitimacy looks at how these actions are perceived by wider public attitudes and impact the approval of the government. When looking at the public reaction to the deportation of Garcia, the impact of virality in this case can be viewed through a 2025 April poll taken by YouGov. Looking at how individuals responded to true and false questions on what they knew about Kilmar Garcia, the perception of government action on Garcia's deportation came out negative, with the results polling that more adults believed the government wasn't complying with the Supreme Court, that Garcia was not a terrorist, or that he had been given due process of the law. Polls by YouGov also indicate how the virality and engagement of the topic has fueled polarization, as Republicans, in comparison to Democrats, do believe more in Garcia being a member of MS-13 and being considered a terrorist. And so now that we've gone into applying blamocracy theory to the deportation of Kilmar Garcia, let's roll into examining the implications this event will have on the topic of immigration. So thinking back to our initial research question, how does the deportation and treatment of Kilmar Garcia by the Trump administration highlight the ongoing dysfunction and politicalization of illegal immigrants in the U.S.? Well, we can see that the communication errors by Trump, Homeland Security, and ICE demonstrate the dysfunction of immigration policy in the current government. Trump's major campaign promises during the 2024 election were on stopping immigration, shutting down the border, and deporting illegal criminals. And yet a singular person has shown how messy that whole ordeal has become, from the justification to the process, the return, and as of now, the new attempts to redeport Garcia to a new country. This administration's attempts to make short-term progress on cutting down immigration only serves to make the long-term immigration policy unstable. Now, one of the few positive impacts we can find from this specific event is that this presents a first-hand account of how the Trump administration will be moving forward on immigration. As the Trump administration still has another 3 years, we can see that the reaction to Garcia's deportation will impact how people protest against the Trump administration and fight against the deportation efforts, such as with the No Kings rally held in October earlier this month, and the efforts by cities like Chicago and Los Angeles to fortify their cities against ICE. But I'd say that one of the negative impacts this will have on the U.S. is that we will only see the continued demonization of illegal immigrants across the country over the next several years. Immigration as a topic in government has moved away from reform or integration into more nativist sentiments. It's all about categorization, not as individuals, but from where you're from. And if where you're from is perceived as dangerous, then you'll be categorized as such, as a threat, a terrorist, and a danger. And if nothing else is to change, the case of Garcia will only serve as how worse it can get. Now, having gone through the implications of Garcia's deportation will have on the U.S. policy, let's wrap everything up we've talked about today. The deportation of Kilmar Garcia showcases the dysfunction and crisis of immigration policy in the U.S., mired in problems of legal status, criminal charges, and violent rhetoric of threats towards those that are affected by these policies. Using blamocracy theory, we've gone over the three main components and have tied them into the events of Kilmar Garcia's deportation. We've gone over blame versus merit attribution and how we apply judgment for Garcia's treatment. We've gone over casual responsibility and who we attribute blame to Garcia's deportation. And lastly, we've explored trust and legitimacy and how distrust in polling has formed over Garcia's deportation. As it currently stands, we can only hold hope for Kilmar Garcia, continue to raise awareness, and most importantly, hold the current administration accountable for how Garcia's case has been handled. From using blamocracy theory, we'll know who to keep accountable if justice is to prevail. Yay!